Hello, I am Annie, and these are my musings. So, welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. Sorry, I'm trying to get my notes on my phone. It's not opening, okay. So, I've recently finished reading Spare, which is Prince Harry's memoir, and today I'm going to be reviewing it. Before I get started, I just want to give a few disclaimers. I'm not from the UK, I'm American, I'm from the United States, and so I'm definitely coming at it from an outsider's perspective, but I hope it's somewhat valuable. Because of this, though, I might miss certain things that someone from the UK wouldn't, but I'm really coming at it from the perspective of just analyzing the book as a book, as a work of literature, and how it works as one, and also just on a human level of having a lot of empathy and compassion for Harry and his wife Meghan as well. I don't necessarily agree with Harry on everything in the book, but I definitely appreciate his perspective on his own life experiences and how they shaped him, and how deeply they affected him. So I'm coming at it from that point of view as well, of just one human being to another. I don't really understand the whole idea of having a monarchy. I think it's a bit outdated, to be honest. I just think it's strange that people are in a position of power that they haven't really done anything to get. They're just born into a family and they're powerful automatically. And I think that the whole entire system is harmful not only to the people living under it, but to the people in it. And I think that Spare really shows how true the latter is. So first, let's look at the book, as a work of literature. Firstly, I want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of reading this book. It was engaging and interesting all throughout the book. The chapters were relatively short, but none of them felt too short, and the fact that they were short and flowed into each other really well just made me want to keep reading even more. Spare was not only an interesting book, but a well-written one. And I was an English major in college, so I know bad writing when I see it. I'm not sure if Harry wrote it himself or if he hired a ghostwriter, but either way, it was extremely well done. If he did indeed write it himself, I definitely disagree with anyone who thought he was unintelligent. I disagree with that anyway, because what I see in this book and in the interviews I've seen of him is a very thoughtful person, and that definitely takes a certain kind of intelligence, including emotional intelligence. As a book, Spare's writing style is very simple, very to the point, but no less beautiful or poignant because of it. In fact, the writing style makes every emotional moment feel more intense, and it makes the reader think and feel many things, which in my opinion should be the goal of writing. Spare definitely accomplishes that goal by making the reader question how Harry was treated at so many points in the book, and by making the reader feel for him throughout the story being told. The story is somewhat hazy at points, but it's explained why in the book. Basically, trauma definitely messes with the brain and the memory, and therefore Harry might not remember everything clearly, especially memories connected to his mother. The book, in fact, starts when Harry is 12 and his mother has died. It's a good place to start, I think, not only because of how emotional it is, but because it sort of gives context for the rest of the story. In other words, Harry's grief for his mother really deeply affects him, and that is definitely understandable and makes the reader understand why Harry is the way he is. Grief changes people, and in a way, it seems that Harry doesn't fully remember who he was before. So Spare is definitely a well-written book. It makes its readers think and feel and understand Harry's life experiences and how they made him who he is. The book does not shy away from difficult topics, so definite trigger warnings for grief, violence, war, suicidal thoughts, and there's probably more that I'm forgetting. But the difficult topics are definitely relevant to the story being told. None of them feel gratuitous or just added in to shock people. No, again, in writing his memoir, Harry is very thoughtful, and everything that he includes makes sense to include in the wider context of the story he's telling. I'm going to be honest, I definitely enjoyed Spare a lot more than I thought I would. I thought it would be somewhat interesting, but I thought I'd struggle to get through it. It is a memoir and a somewhat long one, but it was definitely not a struggle to get through at all. On the contrary, whenever I found the time to read it, I couldn't put it down. The writing style is very accessible, very intriguing, and it makes you want to keep reading. And I think that shows the intelligence of the writer and how thoughtful Harry is being about sharing his story with the world. This book, perhaps in other hands, could have just been a list of complaints or a bunch of secrets told, but instead, it was truly a story. It tells the story of a young boy growing into a man, of dealing with grief, dealing with being in the public eye, and finally finding love. This book may be controversial to some people, but to me, it was written in such a thoughtful way that I don't really see why anyone who read the whole thing would complain. Actually, every page, every word is relevant and fully explains not only why Harry and Meghan left England and the royal family, but also how far back Harry's intense trauma goes. He dealt, of course, with the grief from losing his mother and with intense scrutiny from the media, not only when Meghan entered the picture, but even before that. Even as a child and teenager, the British media did not leave him alone. And that, I think, is all he ever wanted them to do. He wanted and wants to live a normal life, or as normal a life as he can. Spare also shows how, although Harry and William are close at certain points, their relationship was not as close as it might have seemed to be. And again, that's ages before Meghan even entered the picture. Overall, I rate Spare 4 stars. It was not a perfect book by any means, but it was a thoroughly enjoyable and well-written one, and I think that's all I would want from it. And any flaws it may have do not at all take away from the messages given by the story, nor do they make the story less beautiful and poignant. Again, this story is a thoughtful take on Harry's life experiences, and it's definitely written with a lot of empathy and compassion for the people in his life. Now, on to the controversies about this book. I probably won't get to all of them, as I'm sure there are plenty of that I missed. But before I do, I just want to say that I fully feel for Harry. I did before I read the book, but now having read Spare, I feel for him even more. I feel for Meghan too. I think the hate and negativity they get is so disproportionate, so unfair, so unnecessary. I don't understand what they've done to deserve such hatred, and I think that's because they haven't done anything to deserve it. Are they perfect? No. But no one is. If either one of them did something harmful, then of course call them out on it. But do so in a kind way, in a compassionate way. Because so many people have dehumanized Harry and Meghan to the extent that they think they deserve such vitriol. And they don't. They really don't. So the first controversy that I'm going to mention actually happened before the book was fully released. And it was about the part of the book where Harry's in the army, he's in the military, and he's fighting in Afghanistan. Now, personally, I'm against most wars. I'm not for killing or harming anyone, no matter what they've done. I think you always have to look at the wider context of what leads people to do things, that two wrongs don't make a right, etc. So, I'm not a huge supporter of any military really, but I think that Harry's words in Spare being taken out of context and used against him is unfair. Basically, there's a section in the book where he discusses the number of people he killed and why, etc. So now, I'm going to read that part of the book to you. Afghanistan was a war of mistakes, a war of enormous collateral damage. Thousands of innocents killed and maimed, and that always haunted us. So my goal from the day I arrived was never to go to bed doubting that I had done the right thing, that my targets had been correct, that I was firing on Taliban, and only Taliban. No civilians nearby. I wanted to return to Britain with all my limbs, but more, I wanted to go home with my conscience intact, which meant being aware of what I was doing and why I was doing it at all times. Most soldiers can't tell you precisely how much death is on their ledger. In battle conditions, there's often a great deal of indiscriminate firing, but in the age of Apaches and laptops, everything I did in the course of 2 combat tours was recorded, time-stamped. I could always say precisely how many enemy combatants I'd killed, and I felt it vital never to shy away from that number. Among the many things I learned in the army, accountability was near the top of the list. So, my number, 25. It wasn't a number that gave me any satisfaction, but neither was it a number that made me feel ashamed. Naturally, I'd have preferred not to have that number on my military CV, on my mind, but by the same token, I'd have preferred to live in a world in which there was no Taliban, a world without war. Even for an occasional practitioner of magical thinking like me, however, some realities just can't be changed. While in the heat and fog of combat, I didn't think of those 25 as people. You can't kill people if you think of them as people. You can't really harm people if you think of them as people. They were chess pieces removed from the board, beds taken away before they could kill goods. I've been trained to otherize them, trained well. On some level, I recognize this learned detachment as problematic, but I also saw it as an unavoidable part of soldiering. Again, I think this is a very thoughtful piece of writing. Harry doesn't brag in any way. In fact, he understands to a certain extent that the otherizing can be harmful. But he also makes a good point when he says, you can't kill people if you think of them as people. That's 100% true for most people, I'd say. Sure, there's probably a percentage who get some sick joy out of killing people who they see as bad, but most people, they would have to detach a little bit to not see those they kill as people in order to do the job. And in fact, as Harry states, that is what the army trains people to do. To detach, to not view those they're fighting against as people. And perhaps that's a bad thing. I definitely wouldn't agree with viewing anyone as not human. But I think it's disingenuous to support the military, but then shy away from discussing what they do and how they're trained. And I think Harry writes about his experience in a very thoughtful way. He's not bragging about it, he's just stating, this is what I did. And he recognizes to a certain extent the harm that could be done were that detachment taken too far. Claudia Boleyn has a very good video on the topic, which I'll link in the description below. Unlike me, she's in the UK, and I find her perspective very refreshing and very interesting. But yeah, I think for people to be like, oh, I support the military, but I don't want people in the military to talk about how they do what they do, it's very disingenuous and very hypocritical, because if you support something, you should still be able to take constructive criticism of it, and you should know fully what you're supporting. The next controversy I'm going to address is the whole frostbite on his genital area situation. So basically, he goes on an expedition to the North Pole with some other veterans and gets frostbite. He can't go see a doctor about it right away because it's his brother's wedding. He finally sees a doctor about it once a friend finds him one, and that's it. It makes sense to mention it in the wider context of the story because it shows that he can't afford to take care of himself. If doing so would raise too many questions, or if the press got a hold of it, it would be bad, etc. And that shows one of the greater messages of the story, in my opinion. The fact that being in the royal family is really like being in a gilded cage. You are privileged in some ways, but disadvantaged in others. You're not really able to have much freedom, and so it's not too much information at all, as it actually speaks to one of the themes of the story, that of wanting freedom to be yourself and live your own life, which I'm sure many people can relate to. And finally, I just want to express why this interests me so much. It's because personally I feel very strongly that everyone should be able to be who they are. Everyone should be able to love whoever they love. There should not be any hatred or negativity thrown at people for either of those things. And Harry and Meghan are getting tons of it. I think that's unfair and that they deserve better, honestly. I also agree with something Claudia Boleyn's been saying in her videos about the two of them, which is that this whole situation is reminiscent of oppressive and abusive dynamics outside of just the royal family, and those dynamics are important for everyone to understand, in my view. Also, I feel for Harry and for Meghan just as human beings. Take all the royalty aspect out of it. They're just two people who fell in love and want to be together without being mistreated. And the racism and sexism that Meghan has been subjected to is just wrong. And Harry, too, has been subjected to a ton of hatred just for standing by his love, his wife, and for telling his own life story. That's another aspect that interests me. The idea that people who tell their own life story, who tell the truth, and speak truth about powerful systems and people are dangerous and somehow doing harm, I think that's a very dangerous idea. So yeah, that's my root for you, Spare. Overall, I recommend it, especially for anyone who's interested in grief and trauma and the story of how Harry deals with it. Also, for anyone interested in the aforementioned oppressive, abusive dynamics, I think it's definitely a good read. And just for anyone, it's genuinely a good book. I really enjoyed it. If there's any interest in my doing a more in-depth look at Spare or analyzing specific parts of it, let me know. I'm also considering rewatching Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary and making a video about that. So if there's any interest, again, let me know in the comments. If there are any other topics related to Harry and Meghan or not that you'd like me to make a video about, let me know in the comments or on Twitter. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!